The hidden truths in the Buddhist scriptures: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Welcome back, everyone, to Mind Podcast. As you may know, we are gradually approaching the peak of the Dharma decline era, Mappo, as foretold by Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago. In this modern age, we have witnessed many monks who shave their heads, wear robes, and outwardly appear as renunciants, yet shamelessly violate the precepts. They act contrary to the Dharma, indulging in meat, alcohol, sexual misconduct, and a life of extravagance. According to the Buddha, these individuals are false monks. We also see many teachings proclaimed by other religions under the guise of being Buddha's words, but in fact, they lead people toward wrong views and distort the true Dharma, causing practitioners to stray from the right path. So how can we discern which teachings are the true Dharma taught by the world-honored one? The only answer is to rely on the three seals of Dharma, which are impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. Any scripture or teaching that aligns with these three principles or helps people see these truths clearly belongs to Buddhism. Conversely, if it does not lead toward these principles, it is not part of Buddhist teachings. Therefore, to truly understand Buddhism and follow the path of the right Dharma, the first step is to explore the three seals of Dharma. Don't take your eyes off the screen. Join us as we delve into this fascinating topic in today's video. To see more interesting content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. In ancient times, under feudal systems, when a king issued an order, he would write a decree and seal it with the royal stamp. The seal represented the king's authority, much like a modern signature. When people received and read the decree, they would kneel in reverence, treating it as if the king himself were present. Similarly, in Buddhism, the Buddha is called the King of Dharma, and his words are regarded as Dharma treasures. The three seals of Dharma serve as the Buddha's stamp, ensuring the authenticity and truth of the teachings. Currently, the Buddha is no longer with us, but his teachings still remain in the world. Therefore, any sutra that aligns with the three seals of Dharma is considered a Dharma treasure, one of the three precious jewels of Buddhism. Thanks to the three seals of Dharma, future generations, when studying the scriptures, will not be misled or fall into the teachings of non-Buddhist sects or false religions. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there was an occasion where the Buddha asked the monks, "Monks, what you see, hear, think of, know, seek, and reflect upon, is that permanent or impermanent?" The monks replied, "Impermanent, Lord." The Buddha continued, "What is impermanent? Is it suffering or happiness?" The monks answered, "It is suffering, Lord." What is impermanent? Suffering and subject to change. Can one rightly regard it as, "This is mine, this is myself, this is myself"? The monks answered, "No, Lord." This is precisely the teaching of non-self. In this way, impermanence, suffering, and non-self are the three seals that authenticate the legitimacy of Buddhist teachings. All teachings of Buddhism must carry these three seals. Due to their significance, the three seals of Dharma are mentioned in most Buddhist scriptures. The term seal here refers to a stamp or a mark of authenticity. Dharma means the right teaching, or the entire system of thought found in the Buddha's teachings, recorded in the Tripitaka, 3 baskets. Dharma seal means the mark of authenticity of the true Dharma. The three seals of Dharma are the three authentic marks of the true teachings, which are impermanence, suffering, and non-self. In the Agamas, the Buddha sometimes spoke of the 4 seals of Dharma, which include impermanence, suffering, non-self, and nirvana. However, this is simply an expansion of the 3 seals, as nirvana is essentially another name for non-self, as Venerable Thich affirmed. Nirvana is something absolute, completely devoid of self. Having a self is samsara, and having no self is nirvana. The 4 seals of Dharma are sometimes presented as impermanence, suffering, non-self, and emptiness. However, emptiness is just another way to describe the dependent origination of all things. A being is said to be non-self or empty because its nature is conditioned by causes and conditions. Therefore, impermanence, suffering, and non-self can be considered a standard universal principle of the 3 seals of Dharma. The first seal, or the first mark of authenticity, is impermanence. Impermanence, anitya, in Sanskrit refers to change, transformation, and the absence of permanence. Any doctrine or teaching that does not carry the mark of impermanence is not considered part of the Buddha's Dharma. According to Buddhism, all phenomena and things in the world are marked by impermanence. In other words, impermanence means that things do not possess a fixed, unchanging nature. A mountain is a collection of dependent arising elements. The human body is also a product of dependent causes and conditions. Even a discarded roadside can is a combination of conditions, as is a tiny speck of dust. All these things, mountains, human bodies, leaves, pebbles, and dust particles, are constantly changing, lacking any fixed identity, and are subject to the law of impermanence. Everything in the phenomenal world, from macroscopic objects to the microcosmic world of particles such as atoms, protons, and neutrons, is in a state of continuous change. But impermanence is not limited to the material world. It is also present in the world of consciousness. In Buddhism, humans are a combination of two components, nama, mind, and rupa, body, or spiritual and material aspects. These two components are in constant flux, like a stream that flows endlessly. All human activities, psychological processes, emotions, perceptions, thoughts, and feelings exist only for fleeting moments, which Buddhism calls ksana, instantaneous moments. However, impermanence does not necessarily lead to suffering. In fact, if there were no impermanence, life and growth would be impossible. For example, if a rice seed were permanent, it would never grow into a rice plant or produce grains of rice. Without impermanence, the evolution of human history would not occur, and human civilization would remain stuck in the Paleolithic era. Moreover, if there were no impermanence, we would never have the hope of ending the latent tendencies of craving, attachment, and defilements that lie hidden within our minds. Thus, the doctrine of impermanence provides faith in all human efforts for creativity and progress. It gives us hope that personal transformation and the cessation of suffering are possible through change. Impermanence is the true essence of life. The Buddha described human suffering as a burning fire, a shattering of the world. The entire world is ablaze. The whole universe is engulfed in smoke and fire. The entire cosmos becomes fuel for the flames, trembling under the weight of suffering. Suffering is a universal truth, present in diverse forms. In Buddhism, human suffering is often illustrated through 8 phenomena. 1. Birth is suffering. 2. Aging is suffering. 3. Illness is suffering. 4. Death is suffering. 5. Living with those we dislike is suffering. 6. Separation from loved ones is suffering. 7. Not getting what one desires is suffering. 8. The 5 aggregates, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, are inherently suffering. In later teachings, suffering is classified into 3 types. 1. Suffering upon suffering, dukkha dukkha. This refers to unpleasant sensations, such as physical pain or psychological discomfort. For example, the pain from a toothache or the cold when lacking warm clothes. Witnessing the death of a loved one or being humiliated by others, leading to anger or embarrassment, also falls into this category. These physical and emotional discomforts are considered the first form of suffering. 2. Suffering due to change, viparinama dukkha. This suffering arises from the inevitable decay of things that once brought happiness or comfort. For example, in youth, the body is healthy and strong, but with aging, it weakens and deteriorates. The liver, healthy now, may eventually lose its ability to process cholesterol properly. Similarly, today's smiles and radiant faces may turn into tears and sorrow tomorrow. Wherever there is birth, there will also be destruction. This concept can easily lead to a pessimistic perspective. Even the best things in life inherently carry the seeds of suffering within them. In other words, the transition from one state to another and the gradual deterioration of the mind-body mechanism create unease and restlessness, disturbing peace of mind and emotions. This is what is called suffering due to change, viparinama dukkha. The third type of suffering is suffering due to conditioned existence, sankhara dukkha. Sankhara refers to phenomena that arise from conditions and dependent causes. In the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Buddha emphasizes, all conditioned things are impermanent, they arise and cease. This means that everything born from conditions is impermanent and belongs to the relative world, the realm of birth and death, the endless cycle of samsara. The human body, the external world, the 5 aggregates, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, living conditions, and emotional states, All are products of dependent origination and are therefore subject to impermanence. Since impermanence leads inevitably to change, and change brings discomfort, all phenomena inherently carry the seeds of suffering, known as sankhara dukkha. These classifications of suffering are general guidelines. In reality, suffering is present whenever mental defilements arise. Only when the stream of consciousness is free from the disturbances of defilements can inner peace be attained. Thus, impermanence is not necessarily the cause of all suffering in life. The root cause of suffering lies in one's perception and attitude, whether positive or negative. Perception refers to how we observe and assess events, while attitude relates to our proactive mental and emotional response to these events. The world is constantly changing, yet we mistakenly believe and desire things to remain permanent. This attachment to permanence causes suffering. It is like the burden carried by a donkey or a camel, heavy and exhausting. Similarly, beings trapped in the 6 realms of samsara experience endless suffering. But the deepest suffering comes from ignorance, not recognizing the truth of reality and not knowing the path to liberation. The mistaken perception that impermanent things are permanent is the root of all suffering. However, why is suffering, dukkha, a dharma seal of the true teaching? Once, in the Tala forest at Kambi, the world-honored one taught the monks the reason why he proclaimed the 4 noble truths. Monks, what have I taught you? I have taught you the truths about suffering, the causes of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. Why have I taught you these truths? Because they are truly beneficial and necessary for living an ideal life. These truths help you abandon all distractions, liberate you from attachment, end all suffering, and lead to peace, enlightenment, and nirvana. Thus, suffering is the concise expression of the 4 noble truths within the teaching of the 3 Dharma seals. It must be regarded as a constant reality in life and in the awareness of every Buddhist practitioner. Just as we can only treat a disease when we recognize that we are ill, liberation from suffering becomes possible only when Buddhists are aware of and deeply experience suffering in their inner lives. If we do not recognize the true nature of life and instead nurture the illusion that life is pure happiness, we can easily become entangled in the ease of material life and lose sight of the goal of spiritual practice. Courageously facing suffering and addressing it is the fundamental awareness necessary for liberation. Just as a lotus flower grows from mud, the ideal of liberation is nourished by this fundamental awareness. The entire system of Buddhist philosophy is founded on this realization. It can be said that no Buddhist scripture omits mention of suffering and the path to liberation from it. Therefore, suffering is considered one of the essential marks of the true Dharma. The 3rd Dharma seal is non-self, anatta, a doctrine of particular importance in Buddhism. This teaching is the result of continuous investigation and deep insight. The principles of dependent origination, impermanence, and non-self impermanence refers to the nature of change, while non-self signifies the absence of a fixed identity. When something changes due to conditions and causes, it loses its intrinsic identity and thus is considered non-self. Essentially, it does not have an independent subject. For example, saying that a table is impermanent means we observe its gradual decay and transformation in form. However, saying that the table is non-self requires us to view it through the lens of dependent origination. From this perspective, the table is a collection of conditions: the wood, the labor of the craftsman, and many other factors. Various philosophical systems have also discussed the notion of impermanence. For instance, when standing by the river and observing the flowing water, it flows continuously, day and night, without ceasing. Similarly, Heraclitus reflected on impermanence through the river, but from a different angle. No man ever steps in the same river twice, as the waters are always new. While Western philosophy acknowledges impermanence to some degree, it seems to lack the concept of non-self inherent in all things. Therefore, the Buddha's teaching on non-self stands as a revolutionary doctrine. In his 2nd sermon at the Deer Park, the Buddha taught about the non-self nature within the 5 aggregates of human existence. Form is non-self, O monks, the Buddha said. If form were self, it would not lead to suffering, and one could command it, let form be thus or thus. But because form is not self, it leads to suffering, and one cannot command it to be as one wishes. The same applies to the other aggregates: feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Together, these 5 aggregates create the illusion of a self, an unchanging identity. From this illusion arise attachment, clinging, and stubbornness toward the 5 aggregates. However, every existence or supposed self undergoes transformation according to the principle of dependent origination, arising, decaying, and ceasing. The 5 aggregates themselves are the result of various causes and conditions, and the cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death, or formation, existence, change, and decay, is a universal truth for all beings and phenomena. Once in the city of Savatthi, the Buddha also taught the monks about the principle of non-self. Using a humble object, like a piece of cow dung, the Buddha said, "Monks, even in such a small thing as this piece of cow dung, there is no self that remains constant, eternal, or unchanging. If there were even a tiny self that existed permanently and continuously, then the practice of the holy life to end suffering would be impossible." The Buddha emphasized that a lack of consideration regarding the non-self nature of all things often leads to suffering and attachment. These attachments are close causes of suffering. The doctrine of non-self not only establishes the essential nature of the true Dharma, but is also a distinctive feature of Buddhist teachings. Because of its importance, non-self is considered the 3rd mark of existence in the 3 marks of existence, Trilakkhana. The greatest concern for practitioners is to find inner peace in life. All methods of Buddhist practice aim to help practitioners overcome ignorance and craving, which are the roots of suffering. Ignorance and craving are the sources of biased thoughts and behaviors. When our attitudes become entangled with attachment, meaning holding tightly to opinions or being bound to certain ideas, suffering arises. 2 primary concepts that people are often drawn to and bound by are the self, ego, or personal identity, and theoretical views or doctrines. In Buddhism, clinging to these 2 concepts is known as attachment to self, atmagraha, and attachment to views, dharmagraha. Attachment to self refers to the belief that every living being possesses a permanent and unchanging essence or soul. Attachment to views refers to a stubborn adherence to opinions and beliefs, insisting that they are universally valid and correct, regardless of circumstances or the diversity of others' perspectives. These attachments, according to the Buddha's teachings, are significant sources of suffering. In various contexts, such as in the Brahmanuda Sutta of the Vada school, a philosophical school in India during the Buddha's time, humans were viewed as possessing a self, Atman, and this self was said to be born from Brahma, the creator. This notion is similar to the concept of a supreme deity or a divine creator. The idea of an invisible, eternal essence within every being is present in most religions of the Buddha's era and continues to profoundly influence the spiritual lives of people today. Due to a lack of understanding of the 3 marks of existence, Trilakkhana, people often raise questions such as, if humans are constantly changing and have no real self, then who creates karma, and who experiences its consequences? If there is no self, then what is it that undergoes birth, death, and rebirth? In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha taught the monks how to contemplate the true nature of the 5 aggregates as part of their practice, based on the 3 marks of existence. Monks, whether in the past, present, or future, whether inside or outside the body, whether coarse or subtle, superior or inferior, far or near, the 5 aggregates must be contemplated with right understanding as follows: this is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. This teaching provides the most complete and concise answer to all doubts arising from the attachment to and defense of the self. However, impermanence, suffering, and non-self must be understood within the spirit of the law of dependent origination in Buddhism, a teaching that encompasses all other teachings. All practices exist within each person's mind. In the reality of the phenomenal world, impermanence itself is non-self when viewed from the perspective of time. Suffering is not merely a matter of the cycles of birth, death, formation, and decay of humans in the world. It depends significantly on how people perceive the impermanent and selfless nature of all things. Correct understanding or having right view regarding the mental and physical processes of one's self is a clear recognition of the three marks, impermanence, suffering, and non-self, within the five aggregates. As long as human thoughts remain entangled in notions of an eternal self and mistaken attachments to doctrines, the three marks of existence will remain relevant and present in the world. For Buddhists, the three marks serve as three keys to unlock the door to liberation, and they are methods of contemplation to transform the self. Impermanence, suffering, and non-self, as outlined, also act as guiding principles for evaluating and reassessing all theories, teachings, and practices within Buddhism. I hope today's video has helped you gain a clearer understanding of the three marks of existence and how to apply them effectively in your practice and daily life.